There we go. Yes, so we will be recording this webinar and we will send it to everyone afterwards along with the slides. So there's absolutely no need to take notes. You'll get everything in an email after this. If you've any questions along the way, we'd love this to be as interactive as possible. So please feel free to pop your questions into the chat. We will try to answer them as we go, and there'll also be an opportunity to ask us questions at the end as well. So to begin, to get people engaged here. So if you are
Yeah,
for ways,
sorry to ask you. I've just got two people asking me for a passcode. I don't know if any
oh
of you
no
have
worries.
them.
One sec there now. Ellen, who is our tech guru here, can get that sorted.
Let me just paste that in the chat. Give me 1 second. This is deleted.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for flagging that, Tom. And for anyone else that's the same, maybe you could pass along the passcode to people. I'll just wait till that's given out.
Oh, so that's private message. It's not. There you go. Hopefully you can see that, Tom.
Thanks, Ellen. Yeah, feel free to share that with anyone that is trying to get in. I'm sure it was sent in an email as well if anyone else is trying to find it. Okay, to begin with, if you're looking for better ways to support your sports team, could you please let us know in the chat by typing yes? We're really interested to know what types of people are joining us on today's webinar. So please let us know if that is something that you're here for today. Okay, great. Whoa, loads of yeses coming in there. Super brilliant. Okay, that's great to see. You guys have come to the right place. So thank you for joining us today. There's going to be lots of really, really interesting information and key takeaways for you today. So to introduce ourselves, my name is Fiona. I'm founder of Riley Period Care, and I'm joined today by three wonderful people from Shelbourne Football Club. We've got Gemma, who's our the women's academy manager. Fabiano, who's the athletic therapist at Shelbourne, and Octavia, who's head of Women's Academy Strength and Conditioning. And they'll be sharing a lot of really great tips along the way. I'm going to pass over to Gemma now just to give a little bit of introduction on Shelbourne Football Club.
Yeah, so look, at Shelbourne, we've got six girls teams competing this year. So we operate kind of differently to other League of Ireland clubs where we've got girls teams competing in the DDSL. So we offer a pathway the whole way through 11-a-side football from under 13s up to our National League Academy. I think there's ourselves and two other clubs that offer this across a League of Ireland academy. So it's not really done on the women's side as much as what it is on the boys. So it's good that we have that. We've got 7 female coaches involved on our women's academy this year, which is a big increase from only 3 that we had last season. So it's brilliant to get more women involved and more women coaching, and it's brilliant for the girls to have female role models. But again, that's 7 female coaches that are affecting 104 players that are ranged from age 12 to 20 within our academy. So it's important for us to do what we can to make sure we're supporting those girls' needs at every aspect, not just as footballers. Alan, if you could go to the next slide. So we've recently linked with Riley, which is great to have the webinar today. Our community officer, Kristen, who's also our women's under 19 head coach, initiated the partnership for the women's team, which seen supplies being introduced in Talca Park for fans. And when Kristen was telling me about this, it was a brilliant idea for us to get involved and see what we could do to help the academy. And for me, the big things were education for our own coaches, and then supplies for our players. So the webinar kind of came from me asking Kristen to see if we could educate our own coaches. And thankfully, Riley said, no, let's go out and educate everybody. So it's brilliant to be able to bring this to the larger environment, not just within our own environment. So for me, increasing awareness for male coaches in the game and even for female coaches on different things and what we can do to support players is a huge priority. And 2 quick wins that we've achieved. So if you can see the picture on the left, these are period packs that we're now going to give to all of our coaches within the academy. These will be stocked with supplies for the girls. So we've had a shipment of 1,200 pads and 1,200 tampons delivered during the week. They'll be kitted out and each coach will get that. So every player now will know that in their kit bag, whether it's home, it's away, if it's training, there's always going to be supplies there on hand if they need it. And then the picture on the right, you'll see the kit from, I think, 2023. So that's the away kit. And men's would have worn light grey shorts, which are the same colour as the jersey, but the girls were given navy shorts. So it just means that little comfort factor is there, that if it is that time of the month and you're getting ready to play a game, you're not worried about wearing light coloured shorts. And these are things that I think are really important and really easy to implement across the board in any club. There's obviously a small cost involved in purchasing any kind of period products that you're going to stock up, but I know generally from experience in other clubs, parents will be quite good and they'll take turns even when they're doing the weekly shop, if it's once a month or once every 2 months, depending on what you need to chip them in and know that you're making those girls feel that little bit more comfortable having them. And I know a lot of clubs for shorts and socks for match day, players will generally buy their own. So just changing the shorts colour and taking that decision out of a player's hand does an awful lot for comfort and reassurance.
Love it. That's great, Gemma. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's so good to see some really quick, easy wins that people can implement. So just to give everyone a little bit of background on Riley, we're a period care company that was founded about 4 years ago, myself and my friend Anya. Our whole mission is to really make a social impact and change the way that period care has always been consumed. We fundamentally believe that access to healthy, clean period care is a basic human right and that it should be provided in every bathroom that we walk into, whether that's at work, whether it's at the gym, at a restaurant, or at your sports club. So we are working with businesses and sports clubs and even hospitality groups to provide for their people. And we really believe that it is a simple but powerful step in the right direction to achieving social equity. On the agenda today, a couple of things that we're going to cover is how periods impact participation in sport. So we're just going to show you really, I suppose, the impact on that. The menstrual cycle as a whole, I think it's definitely a subject that many people actually don't fully understand. So we're going to give you a background on that. And then the wonderful team from Shelbourne, Octavia and Fab, are going to talk you through the impact of the menstrual cycle on performance, as well as what you can do to break the silence with your own team and what type of red flags that you can look out for in having those conversations. We will have time at the end for Q&A. As I said, feel free to put questions into the chat as they crop up in your mind, and we'll cover everything towards the end. So periods definitely do have a huge impact in participation in sport. We know this. Unfortunately, 1 in 5 girls stop playing sport between primary school and secondary school. This is in direct correlation to the age when girls get their periods. This is versus 1 in 20 boys. So we know that, getting their periods is something that definitely is the start of when girls start to give up sport. 7 in 10, so 70% of teenage girls actively avoid sport while on their period. When you think about it, your period happens once a month. 70% of girls avoiding sport during that time once a month. It's a huge, huge number. And there's so many little things that we can do to improve this. Like Gemma said, changing the colour of the shorts from white to a darker navy or black colour is a simple way that we can change this. Very importantly, 58% of girls in the UK, and actually this stat is higher in Ireland, it's closer, it's above 60%, of girls aged 14 to 21 feel embarrassed about their periods. So it's very clear that there is a lot of shame and stigma still associated with this topic, and there really shouldn't be, because it is a normal bodily function. But that's what we want to come here and talk about today. So we'd love to understand, if everyone on this webinar, if you have confidence in your knowledge of the menstrual cycle, absolutely no judgment. But if you feel confident or not about how the menstrual cycle actually affects performance, we'd love to hear where everyone is at with that. So if you could please type in the chat about whether you're confident or not. Somewhat. Great, Michaela. That's good to hear. That's really, really good to hear. Anyone have no clue at all, or is there anyone that is kind of maybe not fully aware? Okay, great. Real mix here. Okay, super. Great to see that people definitely have confidence in their knowledge, which is a very, very good starting point. For those of you that say, maybe not so much, or the impact on the performance I'm not sure of, or people with no knowledge at all, that's okay. That's what we've come here today to do, is to talk about it and really kind of educate people on it. So the basics of the menstrual cycle. most people don't realize that the menstrual cycle is actually not just the time of the month when you have your period. It's actually the full cycle. For most people, this is 28 days on average. It could be a little bit less or a little bit more for some people, but let's take 28 days as an average. As you can see throughout this 28-day period from the graph here on the screen, our hormones are rising and falling throughout the month. At the beginning, our estrogen rises and peaks at a certain point and then drops off. Later in the month, our progesterone slowly starts to rise, lasts a while, and then drops off. All of this can have a massive effect on our mood, on our energy. So what I'll do is I'll talk you through each phase of this. Okay, so for the first 5 days of the month, typically, again, it could be more or less for some people, but on average, the first 1 to 5 days, this is the period of the menstrual cycle where we're bleeding. This is when estrogen and progesterone are at their very, very lowest. And what that means for athletes and for most people in general is that you may feel a lot more tired than usual, low energy, cramping, uncomfortable. Usually sleep quality can be much, much lower. So what we would recommend from a nutritionist perspective is definitely to avoid having too much caffeine and spicy food, things that would keep you up at night, and definitely stay hydrated during this period. Octavia will chat you through some performance related tips for these different periods later on in the webinar. And then the next phase of the follicular phase, which is the first half of your menstrual cycle, this is when our estrogen really starts to rise. So you'll find after your period, your energy does start to increase as your body is preparing for ovulation. Athletes can definitely start to feel a lot more sharper, higher energy and motivated during this time. We recommend things like nettle tea or red meat during this period, stuff that is nourishing and high in iron to help recover from the blood loss experienced during menstruation. The next phase is ovulation phase. This is typically just like a couple of days right in the middle of the menstrual cycle. This is the best time for women. It's when our egg is released and estrogen is at its highest. We are feeling confident, attractive, we're feeling energized, we have way more I suppose ability to go out and socialize, to express ourselves, to collaborate with people, to communicate. It is just the best time of the month for us. Definitely a nutritional tip is to fuel that energy. You're going to be releasing a lot of energy, so definitely think of high protein and nutrient dense foods to eat during this time. Once we've hit our ovulation point, what happens then is our estrogen starts to drop and our progesterone levels start to rise. Not great, not a great time to be a woman during this period. This is when we can really start to feel a lot more withdrawn socially. We're in need of a lot of rest. PMS symptoms start to creep in, which I'll touch on in a little bit more detail further on. PMS is premenstrual symptoms. This is things like mood swings and bloating and cramping, and that does really affect our ability to focus and our ability to perform. Cravings during this period are normal. Definitely, it's important to acknowledge those cravings and feed those cravings. Often people will crave chocolate, magnesium-rich foods, which means that our cravings for chocolate are real. Just a key point there, but also for carbohydrates. So make sure to eat a lot of, slow-releasing carbohydrates during this period. So into premenstrual syndrome as a whole. So as I said, this is something that happens in the second half of our menstrual cycle. It is a real medical condition and it refers to the physical and emotional symptoms that people are experiencing the weeks before their period. Usually the couple of days before their period is when it does get quite severe. The symptoms are cramping, irritability, headaches, bloating. We just don't feel like ourselves. I know my husband likes to avoid me the couple of days before my period, because I am just more irritable. Like nothing can please me. This is normal. We're not going crazy. It's our hormones massively, massively dipping, and it's something that we just need to be aware of that's happening. There's other health conditions associated with our menstrual cycle as well. I won't go into all of them today because we are limited on time, but things like endometriosis, polycystic ovary syndrome, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is a more severe form of menstrual syndrome. These are all things that as coaches for female athletes or even female athletes yourself, it's important to be aware of them because they all have different symptoms with varying degrees of severity. So it would be useful to, I suppose, familiarize yourself with these conditions and these symptoms at a later date. Um, just before I pass over to Octavia, I'm just going to quickly give you a couple of pointers on how to talk about menstruation to your team, to your co-players, whoever it might be. The most important thing for us at Riley, as we're trying to normalize this topic, is to use positive language, to use words like menstruation, periods, bleeding. This is what is actually happening to us. It is perfectly normal. It's a normal bodily function. Do not shy away from it. Using slang words like time of the month or ant flow or whatever it might be can really like minimize what's actually happening to us. As well as using humor, we would definitely recommend to avoid using humor because you want to, I suppose, acknowledge that you are taking this seriously and that you're here to support your athletes. So this is the kind of language that we would say to avoid and to use. I'm going to pass over to Octavia now, who's going to go into a little bit more detail on performance during the menstrual cycle.
Thanks very much for that, Fiona. So I'm going to touch on a bit more of the effects on the performance. Fiona kind of outlined it, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. So the first phase, which is the menstrual phase, as Fiona mentions, that's when the bleeding occurs. So during this phase, the strength and power volume will be significantly lower for athletes and they have a lower tolerance for high intensity work. So meaning, of course, they're tired during that phase, their perception of effort is high. So we'd focus on recovery, focus on mobility and technique overall. I will touch on the types of different mobility and RPE scales I would go into, but for now we'll just talk about the effects. The second phase then is the follicular phase. This is when the muscle recovery and neuromuscular coordination is enhanced. So this is peak for strength, speed and high intensity condition. So during this phase, I would try implement loaded sprints, resisted sprints, and even sprint endurance types of works because the athletes are recovered from the menstrual phase and they're well able for it. And this is when I'd look at increasing the volume as well. This would then bring into us the ovulation phase. So again, continuous high strength and coordination and performance potential is high. However, there's a high ACL injury risk during this phase. So this is something that Fab will touch on a bit more. But from myself, from an S&C point of view, I'd be looking at doing landing mechanics, cutting change of direction mechanics, as well as deceleration mechanics and glute activation to make sure that the athletes are ready and that there be no ACL injury risk and it will be reduced. And for the last phase, for the effective performance, will be the luteal phase, which is when fatigue sets in sooner and is higher because this is just prior to the bleeding occurring. The rate of recovery is significantly slowed down and the RPE scale is higher and sleep quality is decreased. So for the next one then, managing loads. So I'll go into a bit more detail here. For the first phase, menstrual phase, moderate load, again, athletes start bleeding during this phase, but they're still able to do a bit more work. So we kind of keep a maintenance level from an S&C point of view. So about 50 to 60% from a 1RM perspective. Again, we prioritize mobility and technique. So we'd increase our mobility sessions to maybe three out of 7 days a week just to make sure that the athletes are warming up properly and all the muscles and joints are working right. But a recovery focus and hydration and iron and sleep should be prioritized. So myself and the physios would constantly make sure that the athletes are topping up on their water, supplementing iron and as well supplementing electrolytes and sleep, as we know, especially with teenage girls. They love to stay on their phone up a bit late. So making sure that they know that they need to get sleep, especially during this phase, because we know from a fitness point of view, if you don't get enough sleep, I think there's over 30-40% more of an increase of getting injured. This brings us into the follicular phase, like I mentioned previously, high load, push progressive overload, and a power and speed focus. From a 1RM perspective, if we're looking at load and stuff in the gym, we could go from dumbbells into barbells types of movement, and we could increase our plyometric volume as well. Power and speed focus, we'd be looking at sprint resistance and sprint endurance. So athletes again are well recovered and they're able to go into that 10-15% increase. Again, ovulation phase, high loads. When I talk about load, we split it into two sides. So how we'd monitor it from an external load point of view is what the athlete does. So that would be their GPS, which would be the sprints, the amount of distance they cover. And from an internal load, we look at how their body responds. So that would be their RPE scale, as well as their period symptoms. We would focus on a proper warm up with glute activation. So we'd include a bit more band work in this. I would encourage every team, whether that's from an under 13s to an under 19s to a senior level, to start including bands into their warm up, but especially during their phase, we would increase the amount of reps and sets of that. As well, landing mechanics. We know from an ACL and injury perspective, a lot of ACLs occur from non-contact injuries, which would bring us into the last phase, luteal phase, which would be a low load. When I look at loads and how we increase and decrease, I plan a periodization plan at the start of the year, and I do this in 4-week blocks. Again, when Fiona was talking about the different days, it's really hard to monitor what day each athlete is on. So when we look at periodization plans and managing load, we look at it around the schedule of the different games that we have rather than the period, because it would be literally impossible to schedule everything around the different days that the athletes are on. So again, this is how we kind of keep it simple, but we keep it relevant. So the first week we'd maintain, the second and third week we'd kind of increase our load, and then in our luteal phase we'd be decreasing. So reduce volume, maintain intensity where possible, and lower the volume. So next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk a bit about communication, long-term athlete development with our athletes. So again, like I said, the rest of the slides, you could be an expert at the types of load, about how you're going to change everything around and know the period and menstrual cycle inside out. But if you don't have these 4 things, for me, you're not going to put it to a lot of use. So communication, building trust, that's very important, especially from an under 13s to an under 19s level. With any athlete you work with, regardless of their age, know your athletes, get the time to know them. As well as an S&C coach, I have the time to be with the girls in the gym, which I think will kind of be a bonding experience. Whereas on the pitch, they don't have time to talk to each other. So make the time to get to know them, make the time to build the trust, empower the players, whether that's individually or as a team perspective. You know, if you see one of the players is feeling a bit down, talk to them, empower them, talk to them how the cycle's normal, talk to them how the intensity is normal, as well as the data and recovery, like I mentioned, with the periodization plans. If you're organized and you look at this from a bigger picture, you're able to plan for longer. And the goal at Shelbourne isn't to just get the girls ready for the next match on the weekend. It's to make sure that they can go off and play senior football and thrive in that. So for me, those 4 things are probably the most important when it comes to interacting or coaching with any athletes. So I'll pass you on to Fad now.
Okay, so as Octavia kind of said, the different phases you kind of need to monitor the load, the training load, and the recovery, because fatigue can change throughout the weeks and throughout the kind of the timeline of the menstrual cycle. But it's quite important to kind of know exactly how the hormones kind of influence each specific phase. Okay, so in general, recovery is broken into 3 different categories. So the first one is the physical recovery, the second one is the mental health, and the third one is the injury risk. Okay, so the first one, the recovery, with the hormone kind of fluctuating up and down, so estrogen will kind of peak within the first 2 phases. It'll then drop off, and then progesterone kind of goes back up. So the hormone variation. So when the estrogen peaks up, it in the female body stimulates the release of serotonin, and also drops the core temperature. This helps athletes typically fall asleep a bit quicker. They manage to sleep the night straight through, so their recovery is a bit better. Okay, in the later kind of phases of the menstrual cycle, when progesterone is at its highest, there isn't as much of a release of serotonin, and progesterone actually raises the core temperature of the female body. So they'll probably have a bit worse sleep quality. They won't sleep the whole way through. And even if they do sleep the whole way through, they're not reaching that kind of deep recovery kind of sleep that is needed. When we aren't getting that kind of recovery, that deep REM sleep, we struggle to get muscle repair. Okay, so muscle repair and protein synthesis, which is just the kind of creation and repairing of protein, um, occurs majority of the time during sleep, where your body is able to kind of recover and replenish what is lost. Um, Again, when estrogen is at its highest, estrogen in the female body helps with protein synthesis, and it actually helps with anabolic gain. So actually making the muscles stronger, making them bigger, as well as just recovering. And again, when progesterone is at its highest in the luteal phase, is when you typically get some actual protein breakdown. Okay, so it slows down the regeneration and it slows down the recovery that you need, which limits the kind of the adaptations and the repair that they're able to get. Then, when we talk about the mental health of players, it's quite difficult and frustrating for players to be able to be consistent throughout the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle. So what happens is you get a lot of mood shifts, you get a lot of ups and downs, fatigue is up and down. So in the follicular phase and the ovulation phase, when estrogen is kind of peaking or going up to its highest point, is when you can get an increase in mood. Okay, the players feel confident, they feel like they're able to take on a lot more than what they used to be able to, or they're up for anything. Okay, and then the opposite is also true. So during the menstrual week or so and the luteal phase, their energy kind of drops, their mood will drop, and they tend to get a bit more frustrated with themselves. Even just because of, what they were able to do last week, they're not necessarily able to do this week. Or, last week's training felt fine. Why am I tired this week? And it starts to play with a bit of the mental health because it builds a bit of frustration. Okay. As long as players are there to kind of help each other through this, it can kind of be a bit easier. But typically your mental health kind of takes a little bit of a knock. And if you don't have that support system, like Octavia said, where you've got a team or you've got an S&C coach or you've got someone that can kind of take the time to stop, just chat to them, make sure they're okay, their mental health can take a bit of a knock. Okay. And the very last one, in terms of recovery, is their injury risk. Okay. This is, like Octavia said, there is quite a high rate of ACL tears as well as just ligament tears in general during certain periods of the menstrual cycle. So during the follicular phase and the ovulation phase, when estrogen is at its highest, is when you're kind of mid-cycle, estrogen is at its peak. So confidence goes up, mood goes up, they're ready to take on the world. And although that is extremely good, like Octavia said, in the follicular phase, you'll be looking at kind of building up the load, upping up, getting them to kind of push themselves a little bit. It's quite difficult to kind of taper that down straight after to the next week, where although their mood is still high and their energy levels are still really high, they have a pretty high laxity within their ligaments. Okay, as well as their tissue structure, it's not as stable, it's not as sturdy. Their neuromuscular control is all over the place because although research is quite varied, estrogen is known to be an excitatory hormone. So what it does is it kind of overstimulates, or it stimulates all the receptors in the cells. And it's quite difficult for the ligaments and the tendons to actually know when they're at their full stretch or when they're actually very fatigued. So they kind of struggle to add those kind of factors into having all of the energy and all the mood to take on those full training days. So it's very important that during those phases and those kind of peaks in their hormones, that, like Octavia said, landing mechanics, jumping mechanics, neuromuscular control, warm-ups and exercises are done to ensure that their body isn't kind of falling out of touch with what they need to be focusing on and prioritizing. And then the opposite is also kind of true. When your progesterone is at its highest in the luteal phase, these fatigue buildups and a fatigue accumulation, because like I said before, their core temperature is higher, they're not as kind of exposed to endorphins, so their sleep might be a bit worse. So it's really important to focus on their recovery. Okay, their management of their load, their sleeping, what are they eating, are they maintaining their hydration, all those kind of things. If you go to the next slide then. So then this is quite an important thing. And this is something that's not necessarily well known between players themselves and coaching staff. Okay. When we are, as medical staff, quote unquote medical, a physio, an AT, a doctor, it's known as REDS. Okay, so it stands for relative energy deficiency in sport, and it comes about when you have chronic exposure where you have insufficient energy to meet the demands of your sport. Okay, so when basically, kind of like calories, when you are burning more than what you are taking in, whether it's taking in through supplements, through your diet, through sleep, through recovery, you're burning more than what you're using. You're using more energy during the day than what you're able to replenish. Okay. And when this happens for a very long time, you can get some pretty severe symptoms, and it's classified as REDS. Okay. So the first one is a total drop in your hormones. So your estrogen and your progesterone drop, and it leads to a condition called amenorrhea, which is the loss of your period. Okay. This is something that can be a bit severe if it is a prolonged period of this. Okay. And when you have that loss in progesterone and estrogen, it's also, as well as losing your period, it can also increase the risk of injuries. Okay. Because the hormones aren't there to balance each other out. There's also a decrease in bone density, which later on leads to like stress fractures and osteoporosis. Obviously, if this is again prolonged and not really looked after. There's also a decrease in immune function. So you'll find yourself feeling very sick, fluey, and the little sniffle kind of progresses into a flu pretty quickly. And it's something that you're constantly having to deal with, a little flu, and it just never seems to go away. And then the last one is a decrease in the strength and performance. Okay. If you are feeling any of these symptoms that are kind of linking together, we just ask that you go to a medical professional. Okay. We can help you point them out, but we can't necessarily deal with them on the pitch. And then the last place, that is REDS, is something that an athlete will probably be able to tell themselves better than the coaches or the staff around them, because they're able to feel it themselves. Then we come to red flags that players and coaches can kind of look out for. Okay. So missing their period for 3 or more months. Okay. This is when you start to fall into that kind of REDS category. I understand that sometimes things can happen where you might miss a period here, you might miss one there. But when it's consistently being missed for a couple of months, you start to kind of fall into that high suspicion category. And again, if any of these symptoms come up, we ask that you just go to a medical professional, so your doctor or anyone that can kind of actually do blood tests and investigate a little bit further. And then the second one is severe pain. This is something that, as a male AT or a coach, you might not necessarily be able to fully relate with because you've never experienced it. Okay, so what I typically say is, for a female, you know what a normal period cramp feels like, you know how it normally feels. If it's something that's so severe that you're not able to train, you're not able to play, it's physically debilitating you, this is something you should probably go and get investigated a little bit further. Okay, it can be something underlying like endometriosis, or like one of those conditions that Fiona spoke about earlier that we don't really have time to go into, but it can be something underlying. The next one is irregular cycles. So cycles that don't necessarily start and end as what they typically would, or cycles where 1 month it lasts an extra 2 weeks and the next month it ends 2 weeks short, and then it's irregular in terms of how long they last. Again, extreme PMS. So if you have extreme symptoms of period cramps, your mood is very, very unstable. They can again be one of those conditions like endometriosis or like PMDD that, again, we don't really have time to touch on, but it can be something underlying. And then the last two is impaired coordination. Okay, so if a player tends to be very clumsy and very kind of all over the place all of the time, it can be a personality thing. You know, some people are very energetic and they are just clumsy people, but it can also sometimes be a warning sign of something within their cycle or their hormones or their recovery isn't being managed properly. Okay. Frequent injuries like bone injuries, like shin splints, is actually very, very commonly an underlying sign of low estrogen levels within a player. And the last one is missed training sessions. Okay, so as a coach, you'll probably be able to kind of tell if a player is consistently missing a week every month and it's kind of around the same time every single month, it might be a case of flagging it to someone. Okay, so as a coach, you don't need to track cycles or anything to spot patterns and spot players' behavior. But when you're in doubt, support the player and flag it with someone. Okay. So like myself, like Octavia said, building a relationship with a player as a male AT in a female environment, sometimes I might not be the best person to go up to a player and bring up the issue. But if I know, for example, Octavia or Gemma has a better relationship with them and might be able to just ask them, check up on them, make sure they're okay, it's something that's quite important to do within the club. So yeah, that's kind of all of the red flags and the signs and symptoms that I would have to look out for. So I'll hand you back over to Fiona then.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Fab and Octavia. Honestly, the knowledge that you guys have around this is amazing, and we really appreciate you sharing it with us today. I'm sure there's so many insights and tips that people have taken away from that. So just to sum up the key takeaways of today, first and foremost, I think it's really clear that menstrual health does matter. As the guys in Shelbourne touched on, it absolutely impacts participation and performance. But understanding it is so powerful, right? So sharing the knowledge with your coaching staff, with your teams, and with the players themselves, it really starts with understanding your menstrual cycle, being able to have those open conversations in the dressing rooms. And obviously, it's something that the guys at Shelbourne are just doing so, so well, and they've built up that trust amongst their players. The third thing, I suppose, is that coaches can really, really lead change here. And it is those simple, simple strategies of having the open dialogue with players, doing the quick wins that Gemma touched on earlier to empower the players. And support is strength. So taking those small actions to show the players that you're not just talking the talk, that you're walking the walk as well, and you really do care about this. It's something that will not just impact their mental health, as Fabiano mentioned, but also their athletic performance as well. So try to create those inclusive environments, and by doing that, it's opening the conversation, supplying period products to your teams, tracking their menstrual cycles so you can advise on how they should best train. So I just want to say a huge, huge thank you to the wonderful team at Shelbourne. You guys have been amazing partners of ours. We're so, so happy to be supplying your teams with period care. You are leading the way, such great advocates for women in sport. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. We will be sharing these slides, as I mentioned. There's a menstrual cycle cheat sheet here that you can take away and share with your team. If you scan the QR code here, you can get access. As I said, it will be emailed across. So if you don't get a chance to scan it now, don't worry, you can check your emails afterwards. And finally, I would love to open up the floor to some questions. We only have a couple of minutes left. I can see there's been some in the chat, so we'll start there. And if anyone has more, just feel free to jump in or pop stuff in the chat. So firstly, Orla's asked, are there any supplements that can help with muscle recovery during the later phases of their cycle when the progesterone is higher and their sleep or core temperature is impacted? The Shelbourne team, do you have anything that you guys can recommend here?
I would probably say that the best kind of supplements, as per se, would be emphasizing the nutrition and the hydration. Okay, so the nutrition will be anything like magnesium-rich foods. Sorry, so any kind of red meats, fish, chicken, beans and legumes as well. They're quite high in iron. Um, and then magnesium supplements. So that would be supplement in its own, but again, you can supplement it with foods. So making sure that the diet is kind of where it needs to be. Again, nutrition and hydration. So like Octavia said, making sure that they have electrolytes if they are struggling with hydration. But maintaining that level of hydration. I often see people drinking kind of caffeinated drinks to keep themselves hydrated. If you could replace that with something like a isotonic drink, so like a Lucozade Sport, Powerade, a Gatorade, anything that normally ends in aid, they are your isotonic drinks. So that would probably be the best supplement that I would advise.
Amazing. This is not so much from an athletic standpoint, but one general supplement that really helps with hormone balancing throughout the menstrual cycle is Gigi Supplements. It's an Irish brand. It's founded by two amazing Irish nutritionists who take their ingredients very, very seriously. They're only about a year and a half old, and it's a brilliant, brilliant supplement. I think it's available in Boots nationwide as well. So that's another one maybe to check out. Second question, does being on any birth control affect those phases, as you can technically be having a fake period with them, or for someone with endo-PCOS who doesn't ovulate regularly? Do you guys have any insight on that? I suppose from our perspective at Riley, what we would say is absolutely you're right. If you are not ovulating properly or on a regular basis or are on birth control, it can definitely impact the hormones that are being released throughout your menstrual cycle. The thing that we would always advise is to consult your doctor, get regular blood tests, ask for the specific hormones to be tracked in those blood tests as well, and really advocate for yourself to get that health information that you need to, I suppose, be able to track it properly. Um, can you explain again how you manage progressive periodization and training for a team, considering not all the girls will be on the same phase? Octavia, I know you spoke about that. Maybe you could go into a little bit more detail on it.
Yeah, Orla, so thanks for the question. Like I mentioned earlier, we kind of periodize everything at the beginning of the year in 4-week blocks. And of course, not all girls are going to be on the same phase. And we don't know the exact day that they're on, but we kind of have a rough estimate of what stage they'd be at. So the first week, generally, it would be like a lower intensity. The second week, like I said, it'd be higher speed and power. And the third one would be maintenance. And fourth week would be luteal. So with progressive periodization for that, if you have ever looked at any different periodization models, I use the 4-week one, which again I think slots right in with this one. You can find them everywhere online, but I need to check the name of the periodization plan that I use, but it's a 4-week block, so it fits right in with the 28-day cycle. I think it's ideal, especially for working with females. But again, of course, we kind of periodize everything tailored to fixtures. But if
Mm.
there's one or two players who are at a different stage, of course, I'd reduce their load. And like I said earlier, depending on the external or internal load, just a quick chat with them and normalizing the conversation. How are you feeling today? How's your energy level? Or slightly lower? No problem. We'll change your barbell lifts to dumbbell lifts. They're still at that maintenance stage and they're still hitting the volume, but the intensity is slightly reduced depending on what day they're at. I hope that answers your question. If not, I can add a bit more detail into it.
That's great, Octavia. I think Orla seems happy with that answer there, but I think that's a really good point that you make here. It's like it's going to be so difficult for you guys as coaches to customize the periods based on every single player because they all have different cycles. But if you can have that chat with them and figure out where they are on their cycles, then you can make the small tweaks in the training sessions. So you can, as you mentioned earlier, like reduce the risk of injury, as Fab mentioned, in terms of opening up the conversation and talking to them so that you can reduce any kind of mental health issues that people might have. So I think that's really, really insightful. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if we have any more questions. If anyone wants to follow up with us afterwards. Oh, we have one more. Any tips for encouraging open conversations with players on how their cycle is affecting them without putting them on the spot or putting pressure on them? Octavia, I feel like you might have a great answer for that.
Yeah, so again, like I said in the final slide, communication, trust, knowing your athletes. Some girls will be a bit more reserved and they won't want to have the open conversation in front of other athletes, and some girls are not shy about it, and that's no problem at all. But if you know someone doesn't like sharing information like that, even talking to them and normalize the conversation, the more you have it, the more comfortable they'll feel. And again, I think players choose what they share. We'll never tell them what they have to share to us, but a simple conversation, how you feeling today? And then if you approach them, they're more likely to come then at a later stage, come to you yourself. Because if you normalize that and you're always checking in on them, they will feel like, oh, they care how I feel. So I can trust them. I can tell them how I feel. So I think that's something that's really important. And across from all the coaches in our academy, anyways, I know the girls, whether that's a male, a female, even Fab, Tom as well, one of our coaches is on here. I know they trust them to come up to them, and we all know our athletes very well, so it helps with the job as well.
Brilliant. Amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks again to the Shelbourne team, and thank you so much to everyone for joining. Please reach out if you would like to work with us at Riley. We're very keen to make a difference in the world of sport. And as I said, we will follow up with the slides for everyone as well. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Fiona. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's just us left.
Yeah, sorry, I was just removing people there. I was like, randomly sit on. Well done. You were all
Guys, you were
up.
class. That was brilliant. Well
Good stuff.
done. I think people really, really enjoyed that, and you could see from even like all the engagement in the chat. It was brilliant. So thank you.
No, it's actually brilliant. Even one of our board members was on and she texted me shortly to say about that. It's absolutely amazing.